I'm Jim Knight, co-founder of the Instructional Coaching Group, and you're listening to Coaching Conversations, where I talk with coaching experts from around the world so that all of us can learn better ways to make an unmistakably positive impact on the people around us. Zaretta, it's great to see you. Hey, I want you to know before we get started on this podcast, although we're already into it, but I wanted you to know that your interview I did with you was really influential as I did my presentation on life lessons. And I showed the clip about you being yourself and not being shaped by other people's opinions. And then it's okay to be a nerd was your way of putting it. And then you ended it. I don't know if you remember the way I edited it anyway. You ended it with saying, "My kids say, 'Are you reading for fun?' That's not fun. That's work." And you said, "It's fun if I say it is." So that was a big hit at the presentation. It was really great. Your clip was beautiful, and the whole experience was wonderful. But we better get to the cause today, which is to talk about your new book. So um, I'm excited to see where this goes because your book was to me the kind of book I love, which is it's inspiring, it's motivating for change, it's a little uncomfortable and intellectually stimulating. So as I went through it, it was just such a pleasure to read, but not a book to read for pleasure, but it still was intellectually pleasing to read because there's so many alignments between what you do and what we spent 30 years studying. So I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah, let's jump into it.
So how did this book come to be? What was your thinking and what do you want the book to accomplish?
Wow. So how did this book come to be? It came to be um, in a couple of ways. It'd been percolating for a long time, probably before culturally responsive teaching in the brain. Um, but it came to higher relief after culturally responsive teaching in the brain came out. And that was really as people were trying to wrap their minds around what is this thing called culturally responsive teaching. Um, and I wanted to help people, lift it up outside of just kind of the relational piece or this kind of motivational piece, getting kids to see themselves, therefore, then they'll be excited about learning. I mean, that was an oversimplification. I wanted to bring the science that undergird it to higher relief because it was what I used as a writing teacher to get my students to move their writing. Now, that part was, well received. What I found was people still struggled with closing the knowing doing gap. And I have a mantra that says information is not transformation. And so that piece was percolating. Like people need to understand how to transform our teaching and learning in different ways, but we also needed the opportunity to better understand how to close that knowing doing gap. Like, what is it that will really define that? And so it really is, the science of learning has become much more popular. Back in the day when I was first talking about it, nobody was talking about it. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Then we got into the strategies, right? The magical thinking of strategies. So, and when I say magical thinking is if I implement and execute the strategy with fidelity, then the student will learn. And, there's a big, zone of wishful thinking in there. And what I wanted to do is help people first see that zone of wishful thinking and then interrogate it, right? Really, what's going on, right? Because the other mantra that I lead with is only the learner learns. So just because you're teaching something, if the learner hasn't received it and processed it, turned random facts and figures into usable knowledge, then nothing is going to change. And there are a number of people out there already talking about that. The UK is probably like 12 years ahead of us in terms of talking about and implementing the science of learning. But I wanted to bring that not as just kind of one-off strategies or brain-based learning, which I think is the most oxymoron thing we could ever say, brain-based learning, as opposed to what? The kidney-based learning? So, it's like, well, but we say these things. So we're taking a brain break. I like, Stop, make it stop. Just this oversimplification and codification of strategies that are brain based. And that's not what the science of learning is. And I wanted to bring it back to the realm of equity. So one of the things that I see a lot when I do go into classrooms, and I'm spending more and more time in there these days, for those people that are willing to open their door and let me in, is over scaffolding. And I've seen that for, the last 2 decades, that despite what we say, we cannot get out of our own way around the teaching, and we just assume that the teaching is going to lead to the learning. And when it doesn't, we over scaffold. So the teacher is doing most of the cognitive work. The student doesn't learn any new skills and capacities to become a better information processor, improve their learning moves. So they don't build the cognitive capacity. And I talked about in culturally responsive teaching in the brain as collective competence, right?
Mhm.
This intellective capacity that we all have, right? To kind of build our skill and our cognition and deeper thinking, right? Related to deeper learning. So all of those things, when it was time to sit down because it had percolated so much that it wanted to come out, and I started writing a few years ago, and then life intervened, a lot of major shifts in my life, and I sat that book down. And once I found my equilibrium again, it called me and says, we're here, we're ready. So yeah, and I was able to finish it.
One of the big things, and I don't want to take too much time, but everything I read in your book got me thinking about, well, what our focus is. And one of the things we found studying coaching for such a long period of time is that the traditional model of professional development is you focus on a strategy. Some expert shows up and says, if you use this strategy, research that says it'll help kids. So learn the strategy. Teachers don't really want to be there, and they try to implement it, but they can't really see the purpose. They have a half-hearted interest in it. They don't embrace it. And we found you have to start with the kids. What's the change we want to see in kids? And your book gives us a really good focus for a number of different things we could look on, like the learning power of the students and a number of other things you bring up. So we focus on what's the change we want to see in the kids. And then we say, okay, well, let's look at what evidence tells us about how we can accomplish that change. Now, that work can be focused in particular areas. Like I think it could have focus with your area. And so for us, a focus on fidelity, although it sounds nice, might get in the way because teaching it exactly by the book might not be exactly what the kids need. The focus should be on a deep change in students. So you start with kids and you work that way. So that's one of the big things that struck me. Another thing that struck me as I was reading is, and you have different language for this, but different ways in which you describe this. But it's kind of like pretending learning's happening when it's not happening. And to me, it seems one of the big things I took away from the book is let's not pretend kids are learning just because they're answering the questions at the back of the chapter or because they're doing this little activity or because they're showing up. Let's actually see, are the kids actually learning and addressing that? And I think that's maybe part of your moving from a pedagogy of compliance to a pedagogy of possibility. So do you want to say anything about those terms and why they're so important?
Yeah, I mean, you said a lot there that I could dig into, but I'll stick with the idea of the pedagogy of compliance, right? And this idea of orderly classrooms, that the students are dutiful, they're following directions, and we have a lot of classrooms like this. Kids are good kids, and there is, direction and management of the behavior, and they lean into whatever the task is they're being asked to do. But the research around this idea of a poor proxy for learning, right? That just because students look busy doesn't mean learning is happening. And this is why in this book, I really tried to help teachers understand the connection between this pedagogy of compliance, right? Teachers do most of the talking, students are compliant, There's over scaffolding to move the student through the lesson versus helping the student develop the skills and capacity, these enabling skills and capacity to do that. Um, so the pedagogy of possibility is really about the craftsmanship of learning. That pedagogy is not just here's the curriculum, I want the students to, you know, consume the curriculum, but that there's a parallel body of knowledge and skill the student has to develop. Ron Berger of EL Education, formerly Expeditionary Education, talked about expeditionary learning, excuse me, talked about this a lot, right? The idea of the craftsmanship of learning, that you learn how to learn. And this is not a new concept. It's actually been around since the 60s and 70s. But for a variety of reasons, it does not make its way into teacher education or even what we do around professional learning. And to your point, you know, we pull somebody, a group of teachers together, we bring in an expert, everybody focuses on the strategy because that's easy. And then there's no support once you go in the classroom. You have to kind of by memory, what was I supposed to do? And the part, Jim, that I think is really challenging, that I really wrote this book to fit in the space, is kind of the responsive part of culturally responsive teaching. It's DeFore's third question. You know, his first question when we talk about professional learning communities, what do we want students to know and be able to do? Secondly, how will we know when they've learned it? The third question is, what will we do when they don't learn it? And the fourth question, what do we do when they're ready for more? That third question is really kind of like what this book tries to address. Because what happens often is the teacher tries something, but they don't know what to do in the follow-up. They don't know how to help the student change their learning moves. So, you know, when we think about coaching, adults coaching other adults, what I am suggesting is teachers have to also learn how to coach students in this craftsmanship of learning, right? So it's not just even that we have to focus on the student. What change do we want in the student? I can want a change, but if I don't know how to facilitate that change, if I don't know how to help the student, you know, stay and move through to the outer edge of their zone of proximal development, then it's just me wanting that change. Just the fact that I can name the change doesn't mean that I can facilitate that change in a student. So my book is really trying to get into that space. What do we do to facilitate that change in a student? How does the teacher become the personal trainer of the student's learning capacity to become a good information processor? That's what the pedagogy of possibility is.
Yes, I love it so much, and it's you're taking me back to it. It seems like my childhood, a long time ago when I was studying this at the University of Kansas, but it wasn't really childhood. I was in my 40s, maybe 30s, long time ago. I we really see coaching as happening in four areas. So there's coaching for parents, conversations with parents that can be coaching conversations where parents can learn how to coach their children. There's coaching for leaders, where leaders are coached, but also leaders learn how to take a coaching approach. It's coaching for teachers, we call instructional coaching, and coaching for students. And student coaching, Nikki Knight in New Zealand, who's a part of one of my colleagues, has really focused in on helping students coach each other to create a coaching conversation and helping teachers learn how to have those coaching conversations. And to me, as I was thinking, the critical thing, and you may disagree, and it's almost certain we're going to disagree at some point, but at any rate, um, I think the goal is the critical thing. If the student has a goal, and the more they care about the goal, the easier it is to have that coaching conversation. So the teacher can say, "Is that going to help you accomplish your goal? Let's talk about what can help you accomplish your goal." And my friend Mike Hoke at the University of Kansas, when I was there, he created a thing called strategic tutoring. But the tutor would sit down with the student and say, how are you going to approach this learning task? Let's talk about the strategies you're going to use. Would you like to explore some other possible strategies you could use? And they help them learn how to learn right in the midst of doing the task, grounded in the work. And then But anyway, when I was teaching writing, what I would do is I would sit down with each student one to one, and I'd say, here's what you've got right now. Do you want to learn what we're going to do? And I'd have them write down a goal. I want to learn how to do this. And when the kids had the goal, then we're off to the races. It changed the whole dynamic of the room once every student.
Yeah.
Sometimes a kid wouldn't write a goal. I'd say, well, you're going to be here anyway, so let's see what happens. It's your choice. You don't have to do it if you don't want to. But 95% of the kids would, and I work with students with learning disability who hadn't had a lot of success. And 95% of the kids would start set a goal. Anyway, I'm already letting too much of myself get in here. I want to hear your thoughts, Zaretta. Tell me more about this idea of a cognitive apprenticeship.
Now, I want to first
Yeah,
address
okay,
what you
good. That.
said, because I do think we agree on that. But what happens, this is where cognitive redlining comes in.
Right,
And this is the piece we have a tendency to leap over or forget about. We have this kind of collective amnesia
right.
that schools for a long time, US, Canada, North America, different expressions of it, but the same impact, uh, had kind of two-tiered, three-tiered education systems. So the underdevelopment of students' cognition really was the goal and the aim of public education.
Hmm.
And as a result, you have students who don't have the tools, the language, although because they have glorious brains and probably are, learning outside of school all the time, have the capacity. It just again goes back to the craftsmanship of learning. So the idea of understanding that the only way that you can break through that red line, right? Taking the idea of redlining from, the real estate industry, I try to use that metaphor there, is we have to understand some students don't get kind of the toolkit that they need. So when you come to ask them a question like, what's your goal? I can state a goal. But if I don't have the skill, the capacity, the you know, language, all of that, those things, the techniques, all of those things that a learner brings, me just stating a goal won't tell me how to change my learning moves. And
Right.
it's very knowable, right? To your point, those are things very specific. And so when we use those techniques, like you said, ask the student their goals, sit down with them when they are closer to being independent learners already, it's not a big leap. They just get better, right? But the reality is there are a large number of students who have not had that opportunity. And so it's got to be a little more explicit. So this is the question you asked me about cognitive apprenticeship. So again, alongside the content curriculum, there has to be this curriculum around learning how to learn. So now that the teacher and the student have a shared language about learning that allows that goal to fit into this is how I actually can accomplish that. So I think we're saying things that are quite similar, but the idea is my experience, a lot of teachers don't know how to execute that. So I want teachers to feel like they can be the personal trainer of students' cognitive development, right? And create the conditions, be able to coach them. I have a whole chapter on that kind of instructional conversation that you talk about. And it's not something we need to wing, right? This is not a matter of like, hey, let's just sit down, ask the student to, here's the learning target, here's your goal. It's like if the student has not really understood themselves as a learner, got new tools, new techniques, then their potential is going to be underdeveloped. Just like an athlete, right? Draft, the NBA draft, NFL draft, right? Soccer, hockey, same thing. You have players that have potential. The coach's job is to help them release their potential, right? Not to do the work for them. There's no scaffolding in hockey. There's no scaffolding in football, right? The coach is not going to run on the on the field and like, no, run it down the field like this during the play. Like you have to develop your capacity actually do that. So that's what a cognitive apprenticeship is designed to do. And the book is designed to be very tactical, to help teachers really understand, how can I set up this apprenticeship? How do I talk to students about their learning? How do I help them not just be metacognitive, but also what Ron Rickhart of Making Thinking Visible talks about as being meta-strategic. A lot of
Mhm.
teachers don't really understand what those tools or tactics are. So I'm trying to bring those so that they are explicit. And to me, this is the beauty of, having instructional coaches. Now they have language where they can talk with teachers. Imagine if the teacher and the coach are talking with around the shared language. Now the teacher has that opportunity to develop his or her capacity to be that personal trainer of students' cognitive development.
So I love all this. I have this story I want to share with you. So we worked in Topeka, Kansas for many years, and Topeka, um, it has some schools that were targeted because of so many kids dropping out. A lot of kids dropped out because they failed algebra in ninth grade. They were taking it, they didn't get in middle school, they're taking it in ninth grade. They failed algebra in ninth grade, and then they come back to take it again. And they'd see the same things on the board, maybe the same teacher. And they're like, I already tried, I already failed. I don't see how I'm going to pass this class. I have to pass algebra to graduate. So they would drop out because they couldn't pass algebra. So we had Gear Up funding. And what we did is we put tutors in the classroom. You might consider this scaffolding, I don't know, but I hope it's not scaffolding. But we put tutors in the classroom. So the teacher would direct the class, and then tutor would help the students figure out what the teacher had said and solve their problems, whatever the math problems they were doing. And the kids aced algebra. The tutors were thrilled. The teacher was thrilled. We caught a video of the whole thing. And it had always seemed like, oh, these kids can't learn algebra because they don't have the capacity. But when they had support, they blew it away. They did astonishingly well. So to me, what I read in your book is that if we put the problem on the students, there's ample evidence to say that's not what the issue is. The issue is how we support and provide the training for the kids.
Well, and I think I'm saying something in addition and beyond that.
Right.
Like, there is nothing to disagree with what you said, but it's very different to actually help the student understand that they have new tools and capacities when there's no tutor around. So this is what, you know, Guy Claxton from, the UK talks about. This is a lot of what the idea of learning power is, that the student now has a better sense of themselves as a learner, not just to get on the spot tutoring in the moment. Because when we talk about career and college readiness, there will be no tutor in your freshman survey class. There will be no tutor. Doesn't mean you can't go down to the tutoring center, but what we do know for students who don't come to college with that craftsmanship of learning, those learning to learn skills, pretty much by the middle of their sophomore year, they've made the decision not to continue. So, in addition to being able to have tutors that help, we'll just use this as an example, right? That is a brilliant thing, but you also have to help students be aware of their own learning moves so that they can change them, not just to get through algebra, but to get through anything, right? Here's why this is so important. We're in a knowledge-based economy. Knowledge is going to turn over pretty much every 18 months. It's even a quicker cycle now with AI and all the other information that, now that we're a global society. So the reality is students just need to know how to learn new things. And I think that is the additional piece to what you've lifted up. Yes, they need support, but we also need a gradual release of that support so that students experience a little of the wobbliness so that they can get their muscles. Because if they become dependent on that support always being there, then we haven't really done them any favors. right? Because the next time they encounter whatever the dip is in learning, James Nottingham talks about getting in the learning pit as a metaphor for the zone of proximal development, right? It's almost like, backpacking, survivalist camp, right? Going in out into the wilderness and teaching the techniques of survival and having someone use that to actually get through, on the other side. I think they call that orienteering or something. It's some
Right.
special language, but that's what it is. It's basically your ability to find your way out of the woods. So we can think of this in that way, right? It doesn't contradict anything that you said, but it actually takes it to that next level. So that deeper learning is this set of skills and capacities that I continue to massage so that I can become a more powerful learner as I go, because I'm building my capacity to be a good information processor, turn inert, random, new content into usable knowledge over time.
One of the concepts you talk about is the World Bank concept of learning poverty. And then you talk about the concept of learning power. We've talked a bit about learning power, but what do they mean by learning poverty? And tell me more about what we mean by learning power. Learning power is right in your title of your book. So,
Well, the learning poverty is something the World Bank uh, coined, and they put out a report, and they actually have a campaign to reduce learning poverty by 50%, yeah, 30 to 50% by 2030. And the way they defined it is very much the kind of low level cognitive capacity. We're underdeveloping the cognition. Doesn't mean that students don't have the capacity, but very much like that athlete. It's raw talent. That raw talent isn't going to win you an NBA championship. It's raw right now. It has to be shaped, it has to be honed, and the player is the one who hones it. They get coaching, they get support, but as the player becomes more aware of who they are as a player and their, choke points and pitfalls and the things that they need to improve, as well as their gifts and talents to maximize, they're going to continue to blossom. And the World Bank pretty much said we are seeing low levels of literacy, low levels of being able to process information, distinguish propaganda from real, information. So a lot of these skills they lay out. Anyone can access that report, and I name the report in the book. So that's easy to do that. But there's also kind of this balancing idea of learning power. And it's what I thought about in terms of what are we trying to develop? Because I do think teachers kind of stumble on what this thing is that helps students kind of, build
mhm.
their capacity. And again, Ron Berger talks about it as the craftsmanship of learning. Um, Guy Claxton in the UK talks about it as learning power. Um, I think also you have David Perkins who talks about it as kind of learning the whole game, right? He likens it to baseball. So it really is this set of enabling skills and capacities that are really about learning how to learn. They're not extra, they're about maximizing the physical structures that actually turn inert information into usable knowledge. It's not about motivation. It's not about, self-esteem, although all of those things are related. So in the book, I talk about kind of the six areas of a good, or six capacities of a good information processor, because it isn't one thing. Oh, I'm going to teach them how to do this. It's really how they braid together their what I call unique algorithm of learning, right? The idea that you know yourself, you have different background knowledge, but everybody has to process information. How you do it is your unique fingerprint on your own learning.
So let me kind of summarize. So, and correct me where I get this wrong. So, in real estate, redlining means the real estate people would draw a line around parts of the city where they wouldn't invest because often because people of color are there or they're concerned that it's not worth investing in. And so it becomes a vicious cycle
I'm going to
because
stop you right
yeah,
there. I'm going to stop you right there.
okay, good.
They're not concerned it's not worth investing in. They've determined that is not where they will put their things.
Right,
So I think that language, it may be semantics,
right.
but they have made the determination of who's going to get funded, who's not going to get that. So we have the same thing in school. So just that language, they're not
Yeah,
concerned about it. They are the decision makers and gatekeepers
right.
are deciding what won't go in there. So
And
that's
then
a
when,
really important piece.
and then when the money doesn't go in there, things get worse and worse because there isn't investment, because there isn't a commitment to it
And there's
growing.
not capital.
Right,
I can't build a grocery store if there's no capital flowing
right.
through my community.
And so there's literally maps with red lines around it. And these are places that will not receive funding. The determination, as you said, has been made. These are places will. And redlining when it comes to learning is these kids aren't motivated. They don't care about learning. And so we're going to some extent, give up on the kids or categorize them somewhere else. Is that what redlining for learning is? You're shaking your
No,
head. No.
it isn't. No, like, we can go
Okay.
back to chapter one.
Right.
Redlining is the idea that some group of people have determined that privilege, usually that's white students or
Mhm.
more affluent students, middle class, upper middle class, families, communities. It's not a matter that they've determined those students are unmotivated. The lack of motivation or whatever the other things they're pointing to is the byproduct of this redlining, and meaning they don't get the most skilled teachers. They are going to be under resourced
Right.
for no other reason than the color of their skin, their gender, right? Their language. So part of what I think is so important about how you language that, right? It's not we're positioning it because someone's reading something about the community. It is a group of people have already determined this is how Jim Crow came to be. This is how boarding schools for indigenous children came to be, not because somebody saw something happening in the community. They just decided that group of people is not going to assimilate into kind of our white social structure. And like, this is the uncomfortable part. And I don't belabor this. What I'm trying to, in this book, really address is how do we address the aftermath of this kind of historical legacy, right? What Joel Medic calls the grammar of schooling. And I think it's really important to lift up that is just understanding how we got to this point. It doesn't get us out of it. It's not worth talking about over and over, but it's again important to kind of focus on, oh, we didn't get here because families don't care about education, right? And I think that becomes a really important piece to lift up, right? When we understand that this is really an artifact of kind of how society was set up and it's kind of hardwired into our system. So even though we've all shifted away from that, even though we've invested lots in equity, because we haven't helped students reclaim that learning power, we're still seeing the ramifications of that play out generationally. So yeah, I really appreciate you letting me make that distinction.
Oh, it's good. So to um, deconstruct redlining, cognitive redlining, the way to do that is to put in place structures and teaching practices and also school-wide understanding that focuses on developing the learning power of all students. And that says that every student has the capacity to learn. That's where Feuerstein comes in, teaching, saying that everybody has the capacity to expand and be more successful. Is that right?
Here's how I would expand that, right? Because when we say all students, we have a tendency to put our resources again toward students who are already independent learners. What I'm
Mm.
saying is the students that we have a tendency to allow to kind of, you know, float to the outer edges are dependent learners, the students who maybe very social, maybe good kids, but are not achieving at the level that they potentially can, these dependent learners that we have. So again, I'm not saying that independent learners don't need this, but I'm saying teachers need to focus and make sure that we don't leave anybody behind, right? We had No Child Left Behind before, and it's become kind of a meme and a cliche. But when we say all kids, the equity challenges, we typically don't go to invest in the students that are most dependent. We just give them more scaffolding. And so that would be the tweak in how you are outlining it. That if we see classrooms where a disproportionate number of students are dependent on the teacher or the tutor or the aide to kind of move students through the lesson, then we know they need to build their craftsmanship of learning.
And so, and that building that craftsmanship of learning is engaging students in cognitive apprenticeships where they are learning how to learn and they're learning the key elements of what it means to learn how to learn, breaking down content. You list off 6 different strategies for it, and I think there's probably others as well, but there's a real focus on making sure these, if they have learning power, they're capable of learning. And you talked about metacognition, thinking about thinking, but meta strategizing, I think is the term, is really that the kids, they are habitual in their understanding and use of learning strategies, and they're able to pick and choose which one's the most important one to use at this particular place. They develop the habit of using those strategies. Is
I,
that
I
right?
think I think that you're getting close, right? You're getting
Well,
close.
that's what I'm trying to do.
No, and I appreciate it. You know why I appreciate it? Because we process things, new things through the lens of what we have already talked about.
Right.
And so, again, I think we are still talking about giving students strategies versus helping students understand their choke points, helping students understand where did that go wrong? What do I need
Mm.
to change, right? And so, again, each chapter is very tactical in terms of moving them through, a very straightforward, pathway toward becoming more powerful learners. So I talk a lot about habit formation, right? How to help students actually now not repeat the same mistakes, but be aware of their mistakes, use their mistakes as information, and now craft a new habit recipe so that now when I have task analysis, these are the things I'm going to tell myself to do. So again, we're not trafficking in strategies, we're trafficking being strategic, right? And this idea of meta strategic awareness or meta strategic thinking, right? And unfortunately, and I say this in the book, it's got the word strategy in it. So we're going to think it's a strategy. Give the kids the strategies and they'll work on it versus helping them think about how to move things around, how to do things different, how to pay attention to what's working and what's not working, very much like an athlete, very much like a craftsperson, right? The plumber comes in, we got a leak somewhere. Well, they have a method for how do I figure out where this leak is? That's not one strategy. It is an algorithm. It is a protocol that they use. So we can break that down into very specific things that they need to do that they then put together into their unique combination of those things versus what I see a lot of teachers do is I'm going to teach you that one strategy and now you're supposed to every time you do something it's not about the
Right.
student thinking, it's just about the student employing the strategy. So now the student is even invited to think anymore.
Yeah, that's just, I just think that's a core issue across the board, not just with students, but with teachers. It's like we do the thing, but we don't do the purpose of the thing,
Yeah, that's
or
what this
whatever it
book
might be.
is designed to do, is to unpack for the teacher, what does it mean to be the personal trainer of students' cognition? So
Mm.
I'm not saying, hey, just do this thing. I'm actually asking them to think about this is the responsive part of culturally responsive teaching. What, and DeFore's third question, what will you do? What's the prompt to get the student to remember? What's the coaching you'd give the student in the moment so that the very much like the athlete remembers, oh, I always turn the wrong way and I flip my wrist this way. So now it becomes, oh, I have to be conscious of it. And then I have to do it enough where it just moves into habit. I have the habit for the new thing, and I can catch myself when I'm going down the wrong path, right? And here's the thing I would also say, Jim. So this is back to the cognitive apprenticeship. So we have to think about how we use time. Kids don't have enough time to talk. So this
Mm.
time becomes an equity issue, So I talk about how do you bend time? How do you reclaim some time? How do you make sure that students can talk to each other? That's not always turn and talk. Like turn and talk is probably the weakest discussion structure because it doesn't have any structure for helping students kind of do some deeper thinking, not like a protocol could that has gives students time uh, to think and reflect. So yeah, there are a lot of different, the book is full of kind of tactical things to do that I cannot lift up one and say, oh yeah, that's the key thing to do. Because again, no more than an athlete just do that one thing. There are a lot of things that you have to coordinate simultaneously over time to actually continue to elevate your game, right?
Well, it has a lot to do with that idea of alliance. I can't remember if that's the right term the term you use, but that when I'm coaching a student, I'm not doing a thing to him or her. We're doing this together in alliance. Now I have more expertise. I have a different role here, but we're together on this activity. It's not being done to you. And I think that's what, from my perspective, that's why goals become important, or at least a shared sense of purpose, a destination we're trying, but not just the goal. I mean, my way of understanding it is hope theory. Hope involves something to hope for, a pathway,
Yeah,
and a belief
yeah,
that that pathway will take me there.
yeah.
When I'm
But
performing go ahead.
I was just simply going to say, and a lot of teachers stop with that belief,
Yeah.
right? Hope theory, here's a path, and that we believe it. So there's a lot of cheerleading, but there's not skill building or capacity or the ability to analyze one's learning moves, right? I find it, and I keep going back to the analogy of athletes, right, or craftsmen, uh, um, who are in an apprenticeship. And because my son was a football player, one of the things they would do after their games is they'd look at tape. What are you doing in there? I'm looking at my game tape. Was the thing he'd always be saying. It's like, what are and he explained because you're in it and you can't see it. So when I'm working with teachers and we're using some of these methodologies, we videotape, right? And I ask them, don't videotape yourself teaching, videotape your students learning or video audio tape your conversations with students. Are you leading the witness? Are you doing all the talking? Are you is the student actually grappling, right? We have a lot of discussion in schools nowadays around productive struggle. Well, a lot of teachers don't, they know how to repeat this term, it's the newest jargon, but they don't know how to help students struggle productively. And even what that looks like, what are the components? What do I put in there? How do I help them keep stretching themselves, right? So they get better and better and better. Tiger Woods, Serena, they all have coaches. Why? Because there's still things to that they can't see that will keep elevating their game if they can actually get a hold of it, understand it. We don't ask students to look at their game tape,
Right.
right?
So, how does you talk about the concept of the grammar of school? How does the grammar of school get in the way of the deep change you're trying? And you're not talking about surface level change here. You're talking about deep change. So, how does
Well,
the grammar
here,
of school get in the way?
well, that's not my term, right? This is Joel
Yeah.
Mehta, Harvard University School of Education has talked about this for a long time. I encourage anybody listening to kind of Google that and read his article. I think it was in Phi Delta Kappan a few years ago, and he really lays out the idea that despite public schools investing in lots of change, schooling doesn't look much different than it looked 150 years ago. And that's what he talks about, the grammar of something, the grammar of schooling. We still have, the segmented little things. We still have kind of school ends in June. We're not even farming anymore. Why does school end in June? Like there are just some things we do that we've just accepted. This is how schooling happens. And the reason I lifted that up is because it really is about kind of what supports the kind of a learning in the instructional core, right? The teacher, the content, the student, where they're doing this kind of work, in this apprenticeship of learning. And I don't mean apprenticeship in learning as in these learn to learn skills are separate from the content. The way you actually get better at the discrete skills of craftsmanship is by actually building something. It is by actually learning the content. So these aren't, separate. Like you use them in the service of learning the content, reaching the content standard in a way that really helps the teacher understand how to help the student kind of see where they're going. So that apprenticeship becomes so critical in terms of shared language, time for the student to kind of learn from their mistakes, to talk about that, as well as kind of moving through the content as a way to better understand the content, getting to conceptual understanding. I have a whole piece on there on kind of the scale of grasping understanding. Like people are checking for understanding, but how do you help a student if you realize their understanding is low, right? That helping the student really even unpack that becomes, really important. So the grammar of schooling is really how do we have to kind of push on some of the things we've always done to actually do this new thing, right? And so that's the connection I make toward that. But here's the thing I will also say, we don't make deep change by saying we want to make deep change, right? And this is what, Richard Elmore talked about when he talked about the instructional core. Small changes over time that compound, that then become infectious in a school because everyone sees, oh, right, that's getting us the traction that we actually want. Then those things change over time. We're able to let go of things because we see that's just a habit, that's just a grammar of schooling versus here's a new way we need to do things.
Yeah, I love the concept actually. I think the concept of the grammar of school is really helpful. And so my next question builds on that. If I'm a leader or I'm a coach or I'm a teacher, what should I be doing to live out a pedagogy of possibility rather than a pedagogy of compliance? What should I be doing next?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things. If you're a leader, you are understanding the science of learning as it intersects with kind of more equitable outcomes, right? And I think the thing that we miss is this notion of equity is something sitting over here. We're talking about racial divides or having this. I think we have to look at equitable outcomes. So it's back to your statement. We want all students to be powerful learners, but the reality is a disproportionate number of certain kids aren't getting that. So we can't ignore what it means to embed this in the classroom so that everybody has access to it and is getting the support they need to build those capacities, right? Just like a team,
Hmm.
everybody's got a different strength, everybody's got different weaknesses, but they work on it collectively as a team, right? And so this is the apprenticeship part. Um, I do think the leaders got to be shaping the path. Well, what is the path toward this thing? What are we talking about, right? Has to develop shared language. So again, can't be trafficking in strategies. You have to really help teachers wrap their mind around here's how learning happens. Here's how we get in the way of it. Here's how we're going to, you know, allow it to develop. And I think in terms of the professional learning that they set up for that, again, instructional coaches will have, implication in is using inquiry, using kind of the collective collaborative learning together, right? This is what Hattie talks about when he talks about collective efficacy. So those are conditions that leaders, instructional leadership teams, instructional coaches have to make. That's chapter 9 in the book. Like, what are the implications there? For teachers, I think it's really about looking into your classroom, seeing how some of these things play out, making one small change. If you have to shift the classroom so it's more like an apprenticeship, more like a dojo, what's one thing you would change? Because otherwise, you're going to want to change everything. You can't change everything at once, right? And so being able to kind of lift that up and then inviting students into this apprenticeship. So I lay out in the book steps and mini scripts. Like, you just don't say, we're having a cognitive apprenticeship. Students are going to look at you and say, what you talk about? Right? It's like, how do you roll that out? How do you get students to invest in leveling up as learners? Because the grammar of schooling, they're doing school according to this grammar, which is, if I don't know the answer, you'll tell me the answer. If I just sit long enough, you're going to scaffold me through it. I don't actually have to do a lot of thinking. And we see this resistance coming up toward the end of middle school into early high school, right? All I had to do is, hand in my assignment, and I got points for participation. And so helping students actually know they've got to lean in is something we've got to invite them to your point, that learning partnership, that alliance, you, me together, we can conquer this, right? Being able to kind of set that up. I think are really, really important pieces. And I really want to invite any teacher to, get the book, think about what's one small change I can make in creating the conditions, right? In that condition around kind of that environment, the condition around setting up a few of the structures for a cognitive apprenticeship. It is not as foreign as it sounds. It's just more deliberate in the kind of learning environment that's usually reserved for students that are in honors or AP. It's like, how do we bring that down to the masses, to everyday students, even if we think, oh, well, they're operating at a lower level right now. So that's kind of the idea of getting started, right?
I love it. I think there's some misunderstandings about coaching. Sometimes people think it's just ask good questions and listen and then see if you can find something on TikTok that you can use. And other times it's the idea that, research has been done. We're going to tell you exactly what you need to do. You need to do exactly the way we tell you. Here's the script, follow the script. Billions of dollars was spent on that and reading programs in the 90s and 2000s. Literally billions of dollars was
Oh, yeah,
wasted
that's right.
because they didn't see teachers as professionals. And I think it's both. We need the work like your work that lays out this is what we need to accomplish. This is where we need to go, and we need to recognize teachers as professionals. One without the other, I don't think we'll get the
But
job done.
and I totally agree. And I think the biggest challenge is it's not even that stark. It's not just teachers as professionals, right? It is very much what we do in the legal field and in the medical field. Like, those are professionals too. But part of what those professions do that we don't do is in medicine, they case conference. They have learned to talk together. This is back to collective efficacy, where the professionalism isn't just, well, something, like, if it's clearly, if things are not shifting in your classroom, we deprivatize our classroom so that we can actually elevate. Doctors used to do this. Patients are dying and we can't figure out why. They'd get together, not shaming or blaming themselves because patients are dying, but okay, let's use our scientific method. Let's better understand, so that they are bringing their full professional knowledge, their pedagogical content knowledge, to bear on the distributed expertise to solve these problems using the science of learning. Not do this because I've laid it out, but there is a whole science of learning. I talk about this in the book. This is how we train law students to actually be good lawyers. The IRAC formula. This is
Right.
how we train residents to actually be good diagnosticians. It's not that we have to train teachers, but we have to give more experience and opportunity for them to hone the professional knowledge they have. So I think it's almost a false dichotomy to say it's just we got this content. No, even if there were no coaches, teachers are smart enough to actually say, huh, if I change this thing in my classroom, can I get my students to do more of X, Y, or Z? Now, imagine if they're able to get together with other teachers and there's time for that. There's opportunity, and it's not just, oh, you've got to do this, this, and, but actually, I can rise above the day-to-day busyness of teaching to actually strategize around how am I going to actually get the student to do a new thing, leaning into DeFore's third question. What will we do when they don't learn it? Yeah. So I think
This is
we
this is this
totally
is
agree.
this is our next podcast, Loretta.
Yes, indeed.
We
We'll
just
keep
open a
talking.
bunch of you just open up a bunch of windows, and I'm going to have to shut the window for now, but we can go back to that later on.
Absolutely.
Anything else you'd like? Anything else you'd like to share?
No, just that I always enjoy talking with you. I am working on, some ways to offer this to coaches as a supplement to their coaching practice. Like it's not a either or, it's a both and,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Next June, I'll be offering a set of clinics just for coaches, right? How to bring this body of knowledge into your coaching practice and use it so that the very things you talked about are happening. So teachers don't go to TikTok. So teachers aren't going to just
Right.
Google that or teachers pay
Absolutely.
teachers, right? This is what's happening. I'm trying to disrupt a little of that because it's leading to more inequity.
I'm excited, and I hope we get to talk about it. I think
Yeah.
I've enjoyed every one of our conversations, but I do sit on the edge of my chair, not knowing what's going to happen next. So I'm so grateful for the education you continually give me, Zaretta. It's a great pleasure.
Well, I'm always grateful for the opportunity to talk, to share with your audience, and really just to be in conversation with you. This is that kind of professional learning that I'm talking about. I get better, you get better, we all get better. Thank you for that, Jim.
I love that phrase. Thanks so much.